Theological University in Apeldoorn, the Netherlands. And I'm a professor of church history and canonical law. And also, because this webinar is in the context of resilience, I can say I'm a member of the executive board of Resilience. I will start to share my screen so you can see the PowerPoint. Is it visible? Okay, so the topic is evident. You've seen that. To start with, I will deal with the topic of early modern studies in the context of resilience. That means that the presentation is related to religions and development of religious communities in the early modern society. Resilience is a research infrastructure. These are this beautiful logo and the information which you might have seen on the website. The research infrastructure is a platform, and this picture tries to indicate what the research infrastructure is, where many various partners, institutions come together to work on one big topic. And for the field of resilience, this largely has to do with, like you can read here, with tools and big data. So how can we get all this information on religion in Europe together, make it easy accessible, make use of scholars, distribute it, and also be with this research infrastructure of service to the academic world, but also to the broader society. This is in brief a presentation of resilience. If you have questions on that, please keep them for later on in this webinar. The program is like this. We only have an hour, but since most of us spend about 20 hours a day on a screen, looking at a screen, it might be long enough. So just a brief introduction. Then I will try to give an impression of the state of research of early modern studies, and also what is missing there and what my desires are in regarding this field. Then we will have a short break for questions and answers. Then I will briefly try to connect early modern studies and resilience. And then again, there is room for some questions, and the idea is to close around 7, which I suppose will be a little later, but not much. First of all, thank you for joining this webinar. We have a good response for tonight. So let's start. The order of the webinar is as such. I will start with some things I believe in, then a short presentation of early modern Europe in its relation to the religious situation, the state of research, and like I said, lacunae and desiderata. So let's start. First of all, I believe in this topic. The topic of early modern studies, because that is my field of research and my field of teaching, but I also believe in the connection of this field with resilience as a research infrastructure on religious studies. And I hope that I can convince you of my belief in this topic, as well as my belief in digital humanities. As I think all of us, we make much use of what is available in the field of digital humanities. We can find it at various places. With resilience, we try to connect that all, bring it together in one access point. Like I said, I do believe in it, but my belief is connected with a belief in physical documents. I'm not the kind of person who says, well, sell your books and universities and others get rid of your libraries, just buy a good computer and you're settled. Physical documents are necessary to go back to, also because not everything has been digitized or will be digitized, but I also think in the psychological effect of dealing with the physical document in opposition to just working with digital materials. I also believe in cooperation, and cooperation is essential for resilience as various academic institutions in Europe work there together, but especially for the field of early modern studies, I believe cooperation is essential. The cooperation between individual scholars, between younger and older scholars, between scholars from various nations and continents, but also in cooperation between institutions. We see in this field developments. There are various societies, conferences worldwide in this field, but I think we can do more in this regard. But the fundamental is, I think we should move away from individualism in research and continue the path on cooperation. I will also share my belief with you in dealing with my handicaps. I want to say that from the beginning. Since we only have an hour, I will list only 3 of my handicaps. The first handicap I have is that I'm from profession a theologian. I'm in the field of church history, but I was trained as a theologian, which means I need to learn a lot from other disciplines. And I have this tendency to first look at issues, items, discussions from a theological perspective that I regard as a handicap, and I need others to help me deal with that. My other handicap is that I am from West European country, which means that I was brought up with a specific view of Europe and the history of Europe, the place of Europe in the world, the place of my country in the world. And I've noticed over the years of working in the field of early modern studies that it certainly is a handicap if you stick to this West European perspective. My third handicap, for the field of research at least, is that I stand in a Christian tradition, which means that I also have to learn from other perspectives, not only from other religions, but also from other perspectives to look at religion. And I can say that my experience with resilience and other cooperative projects in this field have helped me to kind of work with my handicaps. And I've also noticed that there are many people in the field that have similar handicaps on other fields, but together we get a long ways and we can accomplish a lot. Early modern Europe, I've chosen for the time frame of 1400 to 1700. I know some go later, some start earlier. There are discussions on this, but this is just to give you my view on early modern Europe. And I think central to this period is the transitional aspect, the many changes that have taken place in this era, of course, other centuries also, but for the field of religious history of Europe, I think this is a very essential period, also for political development, societal developments, but especially for religion. So that is the time frame from which I present this webinar. I now want to look with you at the 3 maps of Europe in the relation to religion. First is this beautiful map that shows us a rather unified Europe, a dream for many politicians in Brussels. And as you can see, this is an older situation. I took this map to give some kind of an impression of the uniformity of Europe in the early stage of the early modern Europe. You can speak of it as the Christian Europe, as the baptized Europe, whatever you want. But important, I think, is the unifying aspect of religion in this part of Europe, as you can see on this map. There's also another map. This is also a map of Europe in which we can also see the essential element of religion in the way Europe was shaped. We have the Ottoman Empire and we have the Holy Roman Empire. And well, you can see for yourself, this division of Europe is largely defined by religion. I know it is not only religious causes that have presented us this map, this Europe, late 16th century, but I think the main element in these developments are from a religious nature. The third map. You can see below that the producers of this map refer to 1555, which is the Diet, the Peace of Augsburg. I think a major point in the history of religious diversity in Europe, first time that it was recognized that there are different confessions in this so-called Christian part of Europe, but you can also see in the Ottoman Empire these various parts, all these religions, confessions living together in one Europe. Great diversity. And I think, but we cannot go too deep in this tonight, that the religion discussions have shaped Europe the way it is and have been fundamental for the developments in Europe. I now come to the state of research in the field of early modern studies. And I will go a little deeper in the various topics that have been listed here. So I will start with saying something about the non-European and pan-European interests. Left is a picture from the Newberry Library in Chicago, and it is just meant to say something about the massive interest in the European religious history, and especially in early modern Europe, in other continents, and I think especially in North America. There's a lot being done. What I experience often is visiting conferences there. I meet so many non-Europeans, for example, working on Dutch history in the early modern period. So many non-Europeans working on, for example, the Italian Renaissance, that it makes me jealous that so many people work on that, whereas in our situation, we have to look for people. So on the one side, that is, I think, a positive aspect, but it also has to say something for us. The other picture is of a conference in Debrecen in Hungary. And I took that picture to say something about what I call the more pan-European approach. And with that, I mean that we see in the field of early modern research, more attention is being paid to countries in the far north or the far south or the far east of Europe. So it's getting a less Western European perspective. I will come back to this later when I present to you my wishes in this field of research. Another development in early modern studies is what I would call multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. Multidisciplinarity, I understand as a growth of disciplines in this field, more attention being given. The field has, for many years, been dominated, many decennia, maybe in centuries, dominated by a focus on either social history or especially theology. But fortunately, we see more disciplines coming in. I've taken an example from the book on early modern legal scholarship, the field of law and religion is a growing field. Much has been done on that, and there's still a lot of work in progress on this field. So that's an example of new discipline. Also, the relation as an example of Reformation in this field, religious reformations and music, and as to interdisciplinarity, the working together of the various disciplines. An example of this book on women, gender, and radical religion. The cooperation of these various disciplines is, I think, essential for the field, and there is still much to be done on this. What I miss, for example, in this field is often the connection between, for example, the history of medicine and other disciplines. To give an example of how interesting this interdisciplinarity can be, I came across a text in which was mentioned a gravito on the wall of a church in Dubrovnik in 1597. And the people in the church, they were often disturbed by people playing with a ball outside of the church, which happens all over the world, but already in the 16th century also. And then the priest of that church decided to write something on the outside wall of the church. And it nicely started with Pax Vobis, peace be with you. But then the graffito continued with the text, but mind also you who play ball have to die one day and appear before the judge. So that is, I think, an interesting combination of the history of sports in early modern times, the history of art, and the history of church and theology. The next development is what I call transconfessionality and interreligiosity. Transconfessionality as research that's being done on topics that have been dealt with in the various religions and confessions. I want to name just one example. Last fall, we had a conference in the Melanchthon Academy in Breton on how the Church Father Augustine functioned in Catholic, Reformed, and Lutheran discussions in late 16th century. So that is a transconfessional approach, and the result was that he was often used in the same way. So they used the same Augustine, just as an example. Interreligiosity, there's many examples to be mentioned there. We can think about research that's being done on the position of Jews and Christians in Islamic Europe, but also in other relations between the various religions, but also the growing interest in what early modern people thought about or knew about religions in other continents of this world. There is also still a lot to be done in this field. Another development that I would just want to point out briefly is what I call popular and intellectual biographies. With these biographies, I mean the growing number of books and articles, papers, and also research projects on, for example, women that were not queens. That worked in different fields. The work that's being done on the, for example, diaries or letters of non-intellectuals, but also the biographies of other intellectuals than those that worked at universities. For example, professional travelers or even businessmen. So this field of research is very interesting because it works with sources that have so far been either unknown or neglected. And these sources are now made accessible. Libraries open up. Archives that have for long been closed open up. So this gives us a beautiful insight in the lives of those that we do not know so well yet. An important topic in the field of early modern studies is the research that's been done on migration and transfer. And migration, as you know, in early modern Europe, migrations were in many cases caused by religious convictions. We can think about Jews being expelled from Southern Europe, spreading all over Europe. We can think about the French Huguenots that were expelled from France and spread all over Europe. And there are other examples that could be mentioned, but this migration, which is a relevant topic for society today in this world, is also important for early modern research. So this migration of peoples, individuals, but most often groups, and what it meant for other fields. Another aspect in early modern research is what with the catchword transfer. So the transfer of knowledge through books, through travels, through communication between salesmen, transfer of knowledge through trade. There is a large field of projects being done on books, on translation, of reception of translations, and that also has to do with knowledge transfer. But this transfer is not only an intellectual transfer. There's also research being done on the transfer of, for example, fashion, of music, of architectural style, transfer of people, younger people that have been made slaves. So, for example, slaves that came from Eastern European countries and were transferred, migrated, this combination, to Western European or Southern European countries. Then another topic I called these national, social, and religious identities. I have an example here of a new book on Calvinism in Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In the middle, a book more on the social effects of religious developments in Czechoslovakia, Czechia, Czech countries. And on the right, a new book on the development of portraits after the Council of Trent, in which saints were portrayed as founders of monastic orders in order to help their process of sanctification. So these books are examples of what I see as new fields of research, new approaches in which many of the things that I've mentioned before come together. I think it is time to go to lacunae and desiderata. I combine these two because for me, what I see as something that is lacking for me is also a wish that this lacuna needs to be filled. I start with west-east and north-south connection. As some may see already, it is not the right way to put the order west-east, because it should be east-west. I did that on purpose because I think especially Western European research has focused too much on Western Europe and would need to reach out more to Eastern European scholars and institutions to work on this field. Same counts for north-south connection. Access to sources. That, I think, is essential for all of us. There is a lot available also online, but there's still a lot not available, or you have to pay a lot of money for it to get to these sources. And there are still a lot of sources that are hidden or locked in a great number of archives all over Europe. A third issue that I would like to mention is the language skills. In this webinar, we have English as language, and English has, as we know, has become the Latin of today. But I also see a danger there, the danger that we only publish and do conferences in English, which is a threat to more national languages, and also a threat to making research accessible to those who do not speak or read English. Another lacuna I see is the level of knowledge of languages like Latin and Greek, so essential for understanding the early modern times, and especially also the religious dimensity in that. A lacuna is what I call an academic Schengen. I dream of one passport that gives me access to all libraries in Europe, that I do not need to get passes and access and fill in all kinds of forms. I think this would make research a lot easier. So an academic Schengen would help us a lot. Then the attractivity. I can only speak from my perspective, but I see it as a challenge for scholars and those who work in the field of early modern studies to make their field of research more attractive, especially to younger people, but also more attractive for those outside of the academic world. So for people in religious communities, but also for politicians, and I could mention many other fields. So how do we make ourselves more attractive? Non-Christian perspectives, I mentioned that in the beginning as a handicap. I think research would prosper a lot if we would take notice of perspectives from other religions. How does someone from another religious background or from a non-religious background look at the various topics? And for me, I take as an example non-Christian, but you could also fill in non-Islamic or non-Buddhist or whatever perspective you would want. Then what I see as a wish and as a lacuna is training. The training of scholars, especially young scholars, but also older scholars in working with digital humanities, in getting access to sources, training also in writing and reading. The next issue is the multidisciplinarity. I mentioned that as one of the developments, but I think still there's a lot to be won on this field, that we should have more disciplines. And I also mean this in this context. The political topic of today is gender diversity, and I do not want to get into this discussion right now, but I mentioned this discussion because for my field, I see too often theologians only dealing with theologians. That's why I mentioned gender diversity. I think it is essential for research in general, but especially for early modern research, that the scholars from various disciplines should get together more and see what they can do together. That brings me to my last point, the institutional collaboration. And there's a lot being said about it. We all know that the big institutions in Europe, they find their ways, but there are also many smaller institutions with hardly any finances, with hardly any possibility of having their sources digitized, of receiving scholars. And I think there we need to find ways to collaborate more, to help each other, as is a European goal in general, as a lot of money is spent on this in Europe when it comes to economics. I think there is a challenge. I see too little development in this institutional collaboration, although there are some good initiatives. It is a brief, maybe it is a little fast, but this is what I would like to share with you as to the state of early modern research, and also as to what I see as what is missing and what should and could be done. There is now some room for questions, and I will try to give answers. So please, who has a question? No one? So either I was so clear or so complicated. If there are no questions, I will continue with the connection between early modern research and resilience. And after that, we have time for discussion on this topic.
Herman, may I interrupt?
Yeah.
I see someone raised his hand. Mr. van Walsum, do you want to react, Mr. van Walsum?
Yes, I would like to thank you for some room for a question. I understand that resilience has to define the period. So from 1400 until 1700 is already quite a long period. But how do you take into regard the period before that? Because when you are talking about Europe, there's also a long period of history of the Greek and Roman culture, which also influences our present situation. So Christianity and religion, well, it was already before 1400. How do you research that? Or why do you cut it, start 1400 and don't look at the period before?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, my answer is because I work in this field of early modernity, and I will not say I do not know nothing of times before or after, but this is the central topic for the webinar, and I think it would be good if other partners would present something on other periods, but still for me, but maybe I'm too much a fool of my own subject. I think this period is essential to understand the present situation of Europe, also in its religious situation, and that this period helps us to understand and to see how we can deal with the challenges that Europe faces when it comes to all kinds of matters, of which I believe that many are related to religion and to misunderstanding of religion, and also to a lack of knowledge of religion. Yep. Anyone else? No? Resilience. Just a few things about resilience. I mentioned already the data aspect. Resilience wants to give easy access to all data related to religion in Europe. That access point is not available. Like I said, it is spread out, with often many complications to get there, and resilience wants to bring that all together by making use of the newest tools in digitization, in giving digital access, and by making use of the expertise. So, like I said, with this research infrastructure, makes use also of experts, companies working in the field of digitization, in the computer industry. And this all results in a new approach to religious studies. And this new approach has to do with the resilience wants to help dealing with the demand of knowledge about religions in present-day Europe. The conviction is that in Europe there is also a future of living together with many various opinions and religious positions if there is knowledge. I need to know why the other does some things or leaves some things in order to understand. So it is a connection of scholarship, of digitization processes, of politics and society, but resilience in itself is largely focused on combining knowledge, digital humanities, in order to serve society. Now, why does early modern studies need resilience? I believe the first is that early modern studies needs the involvement of what I would call the technicians to help them get to know how can I find my material, where do I find it, how can I read it. That relates to this second bullet, the easy access. I mentioned before that it is not always easy to get access to sources. We have great possibilities, and this world is growing every day with digital possibilities and availability. So we need that. I think the past year of this pandemic has underlined the need of getting digital access to sources. We need resilience also for the knowledge in technique, but also the knowledge in like translation programs, the knowledge of how to get to money for research. We need resilience in early modern studies to work efficiently. When you recall the first picture I showed you of this mall with the stores and restaurants and a bus station connected, I think scholars of early modern studies can work more efficiently if they have access to such a kind of what I would call a mall of possibilities. And resilience also offers tools and training. Our experience in the period before resilience in RARES has been that bringing scholars together from various countries, various traditions, various expertise, and learning them to work with the material is so important and gives so much enthusiasm to especially younger scholars. And I believe that the best way to do it for my field of research is to have such a research infrastructure as resilience is. But I think it also works the other way around, that resilience needs early modern studies. The reason for that is that early modern research offers historical knowledge. And maybe I'm saying too much, but I think we had the first Brexit with King Henry VIII starting his own church, moving away from the continent because he did not get his divorce allowed. So this historical knowledge can give insights in developments, in situations. Why is it that the church or Christianity plays such a large role in, for example, politics in various European countries? That you can only understand if you have historical knowledge of the early modern period. I think with resilience, also focusing on serving society, and for example, the political world, I see that this historical knowledge is lacking and is even getting smaller. So this input is needed. That also counts for the religious knowledge. The early modern period shows a multitude of developments in religion, in confessions, in convictions. And I think the present day society and all that deal with it and have to deal with the challenges and dangers in present day society needs to know more about the religious developments in the early modern times. That also counts for what I would call the practical knowledge. Just an example, there was an exhibition in a large church somewhere in Europe where all kinds of baptismal rites and baptismal fonts were displayed. But none of the people guiding through that exhibition was able to explain to visitors what baptism in Christianity means. I think there we need not only early modern studies, of course, but in this case, it was a church from that period. So that's why I name this practical knowledge. Practical knowledge also when it comes to discussions and conversations between people from various convictions and various religions. We had talks of religionsgespräche already in the early modern period. That is not something new, but present day can learn from what has been done in that time. And as those who work in historical fields know, and I think you will agree with me, that much that is presented as new is something of which we say, well, we've seen this before. This has been here before. So this practical knowledge that comes out of early modern research is important for a research infrastructure as resilience as well. Are there any questions for now?
I have a question, Herman.
Yeah, Jan?
In fact, I have two questions. The first is, there are some databases, at least which I use now and then. For example, European History Online from the Institute for European Studies at Mainz. Or, for example, the Oxford Dictionary. My question is if resilience will contribute to connecting these different databases and so on. So I think that resilience could play a main role in connecting these different textual and biographical sources and so on. Are there any plans to do that?
Yes, there are plans. There's, well, first of all, thank you for this question, because I think this is very essential and helpful. You say already that you make use of various of these websites, of these data. And what we would like is that you only have to click to one website to get all this information. But we have the issue, at least that is what I'm being told by the technicians in resilience, is that it works as with the railway station we had in Europe many years ago, that each country had its own width, broadness of the rails, so it didn't fit. You know, you have to switch trains every time you cross a border. And that also counts then for digital data and access to computers. Well, I don't know anything about it, but that's what the experts say, and I think we can have an idea of how that works. So that would be very helpful to connect that. But in order to do that, there's a lot of talking involved that also has to do with the policies in various countries. There are countries in which it is said that this digitization has been done with tax money of the people, so people should get free access. But there's also other examples where it costs money. That's another thing to solve. But the end goal is to make this access very easy for you, so you don't have to switch and you can find it all. The third thing I would like to add is what I mentioned also in the presentation, is the multitude of sources that have not been unlocked yet, let alone being digitized. There is so much out there, and Jan, you work in archives, you know that there's still a lot out there. Many remote collections in religious communities, religious buildings, in various places in Europe that still need to be discovered, need to be digitized and made accessible. So it's a long way to go. Resilience takes quite some years. I think we have a time span of some 35 years. So we have quite an agenda, but this is the end goal, this to make your work easier. But you had a second question.
Yes, and it's about the politicians.
Oh.
Thank you for your answer. The question is about the politicians, whom you mentioned. Well, valorization of research is very important, also for application. You have to show that. And my question is if resilience is already in touch with them, which would also maybe make it more easy for scholars to come in contact with them.
You mean get in contact with politicians?
Yes.
Yeah.
With the aim of
yeah, it's always
valorization.
Yeah, it's always a little tricky to get in contact with politicians, but valorization, making your research relevant, that I think is a growing point of agenda in Europe, in many countries, even what I hear in Germany, that the questions of how relevant is what you do for society. So the connection with politicians is important for us, and we work on that quite hard. But that's also a challenge, because not every politician sees how essential religion is and religious studies are, and also historical studies are for present day society. So we have to work on that together. And it is a challenge because, as you know, we do not want to end up in the other position that the relevance is the guiding agenda for your research. So we have to find the right combination. And I think a research infrastructure is helpful, because that's also a meeting place of these, in this case, to stay with the questions, politicians and scholars. So what do scholars need? What do politicians need? And can you find a way to work together in that? And I think, therefore, such a research infrastructure is more than helpful. It's essential. It's a need. Anyone else?
Yes, I've got a question. Can I?
Kijan, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Could you expand perhaps a little on how this resilience would relate to something like Google Scholar and other big tech initiatives in this field? Because the trend seems to be that big tech is conquering the world, and wouldn't it crush something like small like resilience?
Yes, if it would crush, well, I think the good development is that we are getting more and more critical about these big developments and these big companies. I do not know all the specifics about Google Scholar, but what I do know from my experience is that the choices that are made in what is being made accessible are not always my choices. And I think there we need the independence of scholars to be able to choose what they want and not what Google wants for us. So I don't think crushing is the right word. If resilience offers the quality that it promises, I think it will have, it can last, and it can also get that support from, in this case, the political side, whereas politics nations also have their concerns about these developments of Google and other big organizations. So, in brief, if resilience has quality and offers quality, it will stay, and I believe it has. There was another question, I think, Gert van der Brink.
Yes, thank you. My question is about the earlier part. You spoke about your desiderata. But what if we see that some things are getting even worse instead of better? If we look at a general level of knowledge of Latin, it's, I think, getting harder and harder to get students who know enough of Latin to study the sources. And that's not only a thing of helping each other and joining each other, but a decreasing level in education, which I fear will not change soon. How do you see such developments, and how does it affect resilience? Do you see any possibilities to change such things?
Yes, well, I'm quite an optimistic guy in this field. I do see your concern. I run into that also with students and colleagues, but I also see there is an interest in learning languages, not only Latin and Greek, but also other languages. But we have to make that attractive, and we have to demonstrate that it is essential. And within resilience, you can also offer trainings in such languages, get people interested in this. So we should continue on this path and not get frightened by all kinds of helpful translation programs that give the impression that with such a program you've got it, and we all know that that doesn't work. So, like I said, make yourself attractive. Try to present Latin as a sexy subject to study, and I believe it can work. But we need to create an atmosphere, and I think that's why I mentioned also cooperation. Bring these people to an interesting place. Bring them together. Don't let them study such languages just on their own in their room behind a screen, but connect them. Let them be aware of what is possible. So I'm quite optimistic, and this the way we present resilience with bright colors and with moving images, and like this picture of a library. I think it will work, but we need some enthusiasm of ourselves and move away from a pessimistic approach.
Thank you for your optimism.
Anyone else?
Herman, I saw that Gert van Dartel raised hands.
Geert, please.
Yes, please. Thank you very much. Can you explain a little bit more about the focus of this huge project? Is it more than collecting information from all different contexts in Europe in that early modern period? If I think at your specialization in the Reformations in Western Europe, that is a specific focus, but it was not dominant in that period in the Central and Eastern and Southeastern European areas. Is it an aim to integrate in this project the entire Slavonic world and what happened in that period? So that's so huge, but do you need then not specific central thesis to come to a cooperation? Otherwise, it is a huge database of information that is impossible to understand or come to understanding.
Yes, well, yeah. The first thing is see, resilience is not just early modern studies. Early modern studies is just a part, and since I specialize in early modern studies, I present this in connection with resilience. In resilience, we work with the data on religion from all ages, from all countries, so there's a lot more. And like you said, Slavonic, you can see on the resilience website how that works. This is involved also. And it is more than just bringing it all together and then dumping it at the scholar's front door and see how you work with it. It is also helping to get this access, to get people interested, to demonstrate relevance, to connect institutions, to help open up libraries and resources from the periods before early modernity, but also after. So it is really, it's a huge program, and this is just a minor item in it. Yep. So that's why, thank you for this question, Geert, because my last slide says if you want to know more, subscribe to the newsletter, follow us on social media, but also give us your feedback. There's an evaluation form of this webinar, but more than this evaluation form is for those who participated in this webinar, let us know what resilience could do for you in your field of research, in your work. What are your needs so that we can work with it? We are in the starting process of resilience. So we need to hear from you what would help you to do your work better. Is there any final question? If not, then we will close it here. I think we stayed within the hour. I want to thank you for your attention. I ask Carla, did I forget something to say at this moment?
Thank you, Herman. An hour is always too short to explain everything we want to explain and to listen to your needs. In fact, I have been in contact via the chat with a number of you, and I hope that I have answered your questions sufficiently. But at the same time, I invite you to stay in contact. If you want to know more, just send your questions or remarks to the info email address of Resilience or via our website, so that we can stay in contact and to see what we can mean for each other, because this is also what Herman said, we are building this research infrastructure, but it is not, so to say, made of stone. It is developing, and we want to make use of what your needs and wishes in this respect are. So for us, it's also important to stay in contact with you, and you're very well kindly invited to do so via contacting us via email, or I sent in the chat now also a link where you can subscribe to our newsletter so that you can will be able to know what's going on the platform. And also from my side, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you all. Have a good day, good evening, good night, and I hope we will meet again somewhere, sometime soon. Bye-bye.
Hartelijk dank.